Hello, beautiful people. How are you today? So, here we are again. I feel because I'm so outside of any kind of routine and I can't go into any kind of autopilot, monotonous schedule, that it's kept me in a very present moment, needing to be with what I'm moving through. And obviously, I'm going through so much transition and change, and that in and of itself is such an invitation, whether you like it or not, to really be in the present moment. So, what I want to talk about today is how to move through our emotions and our states of being and different phases of being, because we are a culture that likes to just deal with symptoms. And I'm someone that likes to look at the core, but really looking at how we can have patience. Patience is a big part of this experience and process and journey. How can we have patience to allow and make space for what we are moving through emotionally, psychologically, energetically, spiritually, physically? How do we actually make room so that we can allow ourselves to actually process? Because most of the time we're not giving ourselves that space. So that's what we're going to dive into today, and we'll see what else comes up along with it. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. On a side note, I just want to apologize for the quality of recording because I've been traveling. I haven't had the mic that I normally use, but I am going to storage this week and hoping to be able to pull it out. So my apologies for the quality, and hopefully that will get better from next week on. So, as you know, again, it's like the foundation of all of this. And sometimes when you're in the midst of it all, it's kind of really annoying to hear, but just such a key ingredient is trust. It just is. I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to have trust and surrender tattooed on the inside of my wrist, just as like a reminder. And I don't think much has changed as far as seeing that as a constant helpful reminder. It's like trust, surrender, surrender, trust, whichever way you want to put it. But that is a part of this process. So if you've been following my journey, you know, it comes in waves. And I had to move through a phase that was challenging. There was a big transition. And even though I can say this whole journey of finding a new home is in and of itself a huge transition, right? But if there's different phases and stages of it, there was like a 2-week period, if I were to make it very succinct, that was greatly challenging. And so everything in retrospect makes more sense, right? When we've moved through to the other side, we're feeling okay, things have lined up, things make sense, there's clarity, we know what direction we're moving in. Then all of a sudden it's like we're okay, right? We can look back and go, oh, that wasn't so bad. But when we're in it, when we're in the throes of challenge or pain or suffering or anxiety or fear, it's really hard, and it's really hard to have perspective because we're in it. And so normally when we're in the discomfort, a lot of people want to just make the symptom feel better, right? They want the symptom to go away. They don't want to be in the discomfort. And there's very little patience for what we're processing. So as I had shared with you, as I've been sharing, you know, I will talk about what's going on for me. I'll be vulnerable. I'll be in the state. I'll express the state of suffering. I'll express the state of frustration or whatever I'm moving through. And it's always interesting for me to see how people respond to it. So as I've shared, some people resonate. They're like, yep, I'm right there. I get what that feels. Other people just have empathy. And then there are the people that are like, you know, kind of like lighten up, get over it, like do this, it's like trying to change my state of being, as if to say that how I'm feeling right now, I shouldn't be feeling that. But there's a reason why we have this whole spectrum of emotion. You know, if we didn't have sadness, how would you process the loss of something? Right? Like to have the emotion as an expression can be a beautiful thing. It's a cathartic thing. And I very much come from the perspective that being human, what makes being human very unique as an incarnation is that we have emotion. And emotions, again, if the tail isn't wagging the dog, it is such a beautiful way of expressing experience, expressing existence. Art, in my opinion, cannot come out of an emotionless being. One has to feel. They have to feel in order to be creative in their expression. And actually, when you see art that you can tell has heart and emotion and humanity, humanness, rawness, realness in it, that's what moves us. Otherwise, if everything were just super abstract and, just logical and rational, it would be more in the shades of gray. Our emotions give color to life. And that's the analogy that I've always used, is that emotions are a color wheel. And we might prefer one color to the other, but we cannot say that one color is better than the other. They each are their form of expression. So I will say it again that, our emotions are not something to vilify. They are something to understand as a language of being human. And that's it. Like once you get out of judgment, let me tell you, it's a lot easier. Even if the discomfort is there, because you're like, ooh, God, I feel sad today. But when we soften into, and I really, really love that word, it's like softening into our experience. And if you're a woman, you might find that leading up to your menstrual cycle, you might find that you're more sensitive, that you are more emotional, that sadness comes up more. It's all coming up because it's releasing what it is that we've been holding, carrying, processing throughout the month, throughout our cycle, and then we can let it go. We can shed it. The tears, we can shed the tears. Or sometimes it comes up in rage, shed the passion, the fire that's in you. I just think when we work with this part of us, we can use it as something that is very skillful and wise and just useful, right? It's revealing so much of who we are and what we're going through and how are we digesting our experience. So when we're in a phase where something is challenging and more uncomfortable, there really is this invitation to just soften into it. So I'm premenstrual right now, and the last couple of days I've woken up and I can just feel like there's a little bit of tenderness and there's a little bit of vulnerability and there's a little bit of sadness. But I'm aware of what I'm moving through. So I don't go too much into the story. I don't go to, oh God, I feel sad today, and then let that pull me down, 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 down and make me feel worse. It's like, okay, I just find that I put my hand on my heart a little bit more. And it's like, wow, okay, this is the feeling of sadness. Like, oh, it feels a bit tender. It feels, I don't even know how to describe it because words are too limiting sometimes for the state of being. But I wish I could remember this term in Buddhism where sometimes you can feel simultaneously sad and happy in the same moment. And actually, it's a really exquisite place to be. So when we soften into, which just means I'm breathing into it, I'm allowing it, I'm not holding on to it, I'm not resisting it, I'm not becoming rigid, I'm not becoming tense, I'm relaxing, softening. The softening allows the gripped fist to gently open and eventually come into an open palm place, right? Which is where we want to be living in that kind of receptive, at least part of us wants to be in that receptive space and state of being. But the softening is just the first movement towards that, like letting go, right? So, and once you do that with an emotion, you'll actually find that something that felt uncomfortable can feel kind of sweet. So if I'm sitting here and I can feel the edges of sadness, there's no reason for it. There's no story. There's nothing that I have to be sad about. It's just an emotion, that right now is triggered by hormones. If I don't have any judgment, if if I can just sit with it and be patient enough to just feel it, I can feel the sweetness around it. It's really interesting. It's like, oh, that can kind of shift into like, oh, I have feelings of joy. I have feelings of excitement. And excitement can be vulnerable in and of itself. Right? Oh, I can feel feelings of love. I can feel the vulnerability of love. So I'm moving through these waves of feelings, sensations, emotions. I'm not attaching them to any story, but I'm just giving myself the time and the patience to sit with it. Now, several weeks ago when I was going through this really hard time, again, in retrospect, in hindsight is 20/20 vision. I can go, oh, that wasn't so bad. I got through it. And this is what we have to remember is when we're in it, it feels like we're never going to get to the other side. That's where so much of the suffering and the anguish and the anxiety and the fear and the despair and the frustration is we feel when we're in dark days, we feel like the sun is never going to rise. But it will. It always does. And to get through to the other side, we can postpone and delay it if we resist. But if you sit with it and you stay and you soften into it and you give yourself the patience and the time to know we will move through it. You will move through it. It might be a day, it might be a week, it might be several weeks. But you have to know you will move through it because thankfully the only constant in life is change. But we have to give ourselves that space and time. If we want to fix it in the moment, if we want to make it better in the moment, if we want to change it in the moment, guess what? You're stifling your process. And I know some people will be like, oh man, I can't take that word. Like, basta with the process. But this is semantics, right? What I'm wanting to really speak to is you got to allow yourself to be where you are in that moment, without trying to change it, make it better, fix it, without seeing it as a problem. I know I repeat myself, but this is like, welcome to being human. Welcome to life. It's a constant being with. It's a constant staying with. It's a constant moving through. We're constantly in motion and in movement. I really like this term that I can't say that I came up with because nobody's come up with anything original anymore, but stillness in motion. Because we're constantly moving, but can we find the stillness within the movement? Can we find the still point, the place of peace? And peace comes through the softening, the relaxing into, and the accepting and the allowing of what is. And the thing is of course we're going to reach those moments of tension. Of course we're going to have sometimes those experiences where you can't let go. You don't want to let go. I mean, I see it so much with having a child that, she can get into a state of being where she's really upset about something and there is no changing it. So the first point of meeting her is like, okay, yeah, right now it really sucks, doesn't it? Right now you're really upset about this because sometimes we get stubborn. I have enough self-awareness now where I know when I'm going into a mood or when I'm going into a state. And sometimes I can go, okay, Corinne, make a different choice. And I can make a different choice. And sometimes it's like, nope, I don't want to make a different choice. I want to be upset. I want to be mad. So I'm going to give you an example of that. So I haven't had any time to myself in 3 months because I've been traveling with my daughter and then, living in my mom's house, and then her father was here too. It's like, it's been lots of people, lots of noise, and no time to myself. So I booked an Airbnb for 2 nights by the sea. And I went there and it was a little bit like, wasn't what I was expecting, didn't look like the photo. So there was a little bit of disappointment and, I was really tired. I had a day where I just felt, I shared a video where it was like, I felt really bitch slapped by the universe that day. There was just a lot of different things going on, little kind of confrontations and misunderstandings, miscommunications. It was an odd day for a lot of people that I knew. And I was, I'd had an okay evening. It wasn't very comfortable in the Airbnb, but I was like, okay, I'm going to go to bed. And I thought, well, let me just go outside for a moment, look at the stars. I'm at the sea, just go out, get some sea breeze, see the stars. So I open the door, I leave the door open, I go out literally for a minute. It wasn't very long at all. And then I turn around to go back, and as I'm going to reach for the door, instead of it opening, it shuts and it locks itself. It's like these doors there are these doors in this country that like, they just lock. They lock behind. If if you don't have your keys, you're screwed. So I was like, shit. And I went upstairs. The landlords, luckily, the owners lived upstairs. It was late. It was past 10 p.m., but they happened to be up. And they're like, that's okay. We have another set of keys. They come down. The door doesn't open because my keys are in the inside of the door. So the door locks itself. And if you have the keys on the inside, you cannot open it from the outside. And I went into a kind of like instinctual reaction to it. It was very interesting. And I tell you, with this crazy new era that we're in, I was like, it triggered this like, wow, if I was on my own, I didn't have my phone, I didn't have my car keys, I know nobody's number because I used to memorize numbers before smartphones, but we get super lazy. And I was thinking, if I was on my own, what would I do? Like, what would I do? I would have, I'd be sleeping outside that night. And so there was a very instinctual reaction. So I started to get reactive. We were all arguing amongst each other because the wife was telling me off. And I was like, yeah, but you need to be telling me that, that the door locks itself behind. And you'd never told me that. My door, in 43 years, I've never had a door that's done that to me. And so we're arguing in Italian, and it's just like, it's almost comical. But I could feel there was a part of me that was wanting to be very reactive, that was coming from an instinctual part of my brain. So it wasn't logical or rational, but was reactive, right? Like the reptilian part of the brain. And then there was this other part that was saying, the conscious aware part that was like, you don't have to react like this. Like, it's okay. It's going to be okay. But there was a period, because I remember I wanted to cry because there was all this feeling. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't cry. So clearly it wasn't like so dramatic and drastic, because otherwise I would have cried, right? So there was a part of me that actually fundamentally was pretty calm, and could almost wanted to laugh at it. Like, it was almost comical. I was so exhausted that I was like, you've got to be kidding. Like, you've got to be kidding. I've just spent this money that I shouldn't be spending. I'm coming here to have a relaxing time, and I'm having the most unrelaxing time possible. It is comical, right? So at one point, it's like, okay, we're trying to figure out what to do, and it's nothing is working. The old man calls somebody else that he knows. They're going to come in a half an hour, which ended up being an hour, because welcome to Italian time. And so then at one point, I let it go. I just let it go. And we ended up having a really nice conversation. I went up and had a tea, and even the wife ended up being really sweet and showing me paintings that she had painted. And he said something that was so lovely. He said, everything except for death in life is solvable. Like, it just is. At one point or another, in one shape or form, it will be solvable. So long story short, these guys come, they try to like pry open the door. It's not working. They try to see through a window. This little guy has to go around the back of the house into the tunnel system where like all the tubing is. And there's a little cubby hole that comes out into the bedroom, which thank God wasn't locked. And he comes through the bedroom. There's dirt all over the bed and on the floor. So I had to sleep like on a half muddied bed. But it was solvable, right? Like 2 hours later, but it was solvable. But the point of the story is, there's a couple points to the story, but one was just, I was very observant of my state of being and my emotional reaction. And in the beginning, that reaction was too stubborn to want to just drop it, right? And sometimes it's hard when we've been triggered. This is what happens a lot with couples when they argue. Once we're triggered, it takes a little bit of time to just decompress a little bit. So having the self-awareness is really useful. That's why doing this work is really important, because you can catch it in the moment. You can observe what you're doing. But sometimes even then it's really hard in the moment to say, okay, boom, like that, I'm just going to switch. I'm going to switch my state of being. Sometimes it will take a couple hours. For some people it takes a couple days. For some it takes a couple hours. For me, it took about 10 minutes. And then I finally was like, okay, I can let it go. So this is what I mean by have the patience and don't resist where you are. Like, I think if you have the self-awareness and you're conscious of the state you're in, you're conscious of the choice you're making in that state. So I made a choice where I still wanted to be in the reactivity for a while. But then I also made another choice 10 minutes later, let's say, where I said, okay, I can drop it. I don't need to do that. And it was almost like it was a habitual stress response, right? But this is where we evolve, as we can go, okay, next time I don't have to make that choice, or at least I made the choice to change and it didn't last that long. You know, the evolution is, it's bit by bit by bit. We want things to be so like press a button and it's done. We want instant coffee. We want instant coffee with our state of being. And you know, we're a slow burner, right? We are a slow burner as human beings. And also things to manifest into physical form. You know, we can have the intention. That's why you do the work in a session with a coach or a therapist or whatever, someone that's facilitating and guiding you. You're creating an intention. You're doing the work in a state of awareness and conscious awareness where you're not triggered. So then the intention is the first point of shifting our habits, our belief systems, our patterns, our state of being, our very identity, right? Then we have to get our emotional self on board. That tends to be the next step, and sometimes that could take a little while. The third and hardest thing is the physical. The physical takes a lot more time because it's dense. To move through the physical body, it's dense. And to move through this 3D realm, it's dense. So that's what takes longer. And that's where the patience is really required. So when people just say in the moment, lighten up, well, sometimes it doesn't happen that quickly. You can have the intention, but what I find, I've just found for myself that if I try to fight against my current state of being and expect myself to change it in that moment, often the change is coming from a judgment. Oh, you shouldn't. You shouldn't be feeling down. Lighten up. That's a judgment. Even if that person wants you to feel better, it's still denying where you're at in that moment. And then that's an added suffering. Oh, it's not okay for me to feel like this. I'm not allowed to feel like this. Oh, this isn't very spiritual to feel like this. Oh, fuck all of that. Sorry, excuse my language. But honestly, you're human. You get to feel. Give yourself the patience, the kindness, and the compassion to move through it in your own timing. Give that to yourself. Because otherwise you're fighting against not only the state of being that you're in, but you're fighting against your judgments about that state of being. And you're going to be fighting against your worth within all of that. Right? Because it's like we're throwing in shame and judgment, and that's going to affect our identity. So, you know what I mean? Unnecessary suffering, as you've heard me talk about in the past. So, sometimes we're moving just through an experience like that, where it's just an evening. But even that, it has its process, right? It has its moment, its time, its unfolding and unfurling. You know, or if I look at the last, month of what I've been moving through, I had a 2-week phase that was really challenging, and I had to just move through it. Now I'm on the other side. Now there's clarity for the next step. Now there's a sense of excitement. Now there's a sense of movement. But in that phase, I felt like, what the hell am I doing? Like I felt all sorts of things, and it's just, that was the process. That was the purging. And I think when we find ourselves in difficult, challenging moments, what I find most helpful is don't try to change it. Don't try to make it better. Don't try to fix it. Give it breathing room. Give it space. Sit in the discomfort. You're going to have to sit in the fire. And just, if you can, inject, whether you believe it or not in that moment, but just the reminder, you will get through it. You will get through to the other side. So even just can I be patient? Can I be patient enough to feel what I'm feeling, to move through what I'm moving through, trusting that I will get through to the other side? So there's our emotions, there's our state of being, and there's a phase. There's a phase that we're going through. Sometimes that phase is a day. Sometimes that phase is 2 weeks. Sometimes that phase is 6 months. God knows. But this is the thing about time, right? Because time is totally relative. It's completely relative. It does not move at a constant speed. We think it does because we look at the clock and the hands that, the second hand, right? But that, let's say you're doing something that you're really enjoying and you're loving it and you're lost in it. Time goes like super fast, right? But if you're in a job, then you're stuck at the desk and you're bored out of your mind and you keep on looking at the clock and you keep on looking at the clock and again, that day is going to move really slowly, right? So it's totally relative. Same thing that when you're moving through discomfort, like in those 2 weeks, it felt like the most drawn out, painful time. It felt like it was never going to end or never going to change. And the weather was dreadful. It was just gray day after gray day after gray day. And you're stuck in the house and you think, oh my God, it's going to be like this forever. But then once you're through and you're on the other side, you look back and you go, oh, that wasn't so bad. That went by quickly. So do you see what I'm saying? It's all relative. So if after the fact you can see, hindsight can go, oh, it wasn't that bad, or it's relative, or who was talking about this? Robert, oh, I don't remember his last name. I was listening to a podcast and he said something that was brilliant, that he's like, we can change our history. Because he was using the example of, you can go through something that in it was like, you could say that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. That was terrible. Then time passes and you reflect back and maybe you see the wisdom, you see the lesson, you see the gift. And that very same event, you could say that was the best thing that ever happened to me. And he said, and that's how you change your history. And it's true. It is so true. I was injured for 7 years of my life. That took me away from my career, my passion, my dream. It was what launched me into this question in my spiritual path and journey of who am I without the identity of being a dancer. I thought by the age of 30, I was going to have to be like with a walking stick, like an old lady. I was in so much pain. I couldn't even walk a block without being in pain. I was in pain every single day for 7 years. That's a long time. When I look back at that period now, like in that moment, it was devastating for me. It was physically and emotionally and spiritually painful. But when I look back, I go, that was such a great gift because it gave me so much wisdom and knowledge and the ability to be with pain and discomfort and suffering and shifting identities and shifting your idea of what life should be and what it was going to be and getting off the trajectory. And it took me on a whole journey that I could have never anticipated or created. And it's what's allowed me to have the wisdom that I have today. And actually what's so beautiful as an affirmation of this is that a couple weeks ago, I got an email from a client that I've been working with on and off for a long time. And they said something to the effect of like, you probably already know this, but maybe your injury was like, it was a gift because it's given you what now I can help other people because I have the understanding, I've had the experience, I have the empathy. And they wrote it in a really, really beautiful way. And it's like, yeah, I don't regret that at all. It was absolutely a gift. It's absolutely was the classroom and, my PhD, because this is the school of life, in how to guide people through their own pain and suffering, their own disappointment, their own frustration, being human, having emotions, having pain, having suffering, being limited. So many things I could look back and say there's so many things that I learned and gained and that I'm so grateful for that experience. And guess what? I made it through to the other side. And I thought I would have that pain till the day I die. So nothing happens without reason. And I just think that in the moment, it's really hard and people are going to want to fix it and make it better because they don't want to sit in the discomfort. And there's a hell of a lot of spiritual bypassing that goes on too. There's a lot of distraction that goes on too. And we're living in a world where it's hard. It's hard to be conscious. It's hard to walk an awakened path because everything is vying for your attention and to distract you and to pull you away from your center, from your inner knowing, from your wisdom, from your soul, your higher state, just from your intuition, from your feeling, from your emotions. There's a lot of distraction. And so you got to kind of be like a Olympic athlete and keep focus. Keep your focus. Stay in your lane. Play your game. I mean, I don't really like these terms, but you get the point, right? I'm just trying to make a point. So trust. It's a bitch, I know, but you got to trust. You will move through whatever you're going through. Give yourself the room and space to feel the feelings, the emotions. Allow the state of being, allow the phase of being to move through it in its own time. And it's one thing that, with children, if you can watch children, if you can observe them, you will see them go through all of that. They'll have their tantrum, they'll have big feelings, big emotions. Their state of being will be a certain way for a while. You'll have a moment, you're seeing it all like in rapid speed, right? The emotion, the state of being, the phase. And then all of a sudden, when they've processed it, it's like nothing happened. They're like good as day, right? They are brilliant teachers to observe what the human does. And then it's amazing how they actually drop it. Like I've noticed that as my daughter gets older and older, it takes longer for her to drop it, because children, when they're little, they're much more in the present moment. As we get older, we build the identity, we build the belief systems, we build the story. That's the biggest thing, is we build the story. The story has already been, the narrative has been going, right? And that's what we get attached to. This hurt, and then that means that, and therefore that means that. And I'm constantly having to remind my daughter, don't get stuck in the story. Don't create that story. You're creating a story right now. Don't do that, because you're going to hurt yourself. And it's just not true. It's false. So drop the story. Just be with the feeling. So it's like present moment. Deal with the feeling in the present moment. And most people go into a narrative because they haven't felt the feeling, because they haven't given themselves the patience, the space, and the time to just feel the feeling. So the invitation is, don't, it just sounds so simplistic. Don't change where you're at in the moment. And I know that sounds really weird, because it's like, well, we don't want to wallow and sit with what we're in, right? But what I mean by that is, don't control it. And just going back to the story that I shared, the irony is I had literally just been watching an Instagram live of someone that I follow, and she was talking all about like, we're not in control of anything. Like, don't change. She speaks actually very similar to the way that I speak. A friend of mine first introduced me to her because she's like, oh, you guys are very similar. But she was just talking about like, don't change how you feel. Don't change this. Like, we're not in control. Just let go. And then I put myself in this position where I had zero control of anything. I had no control of getting back in the house. And so I felt like that was an instant universal kind of like playful test, if you will, So don't control. So that's what I mean by change. We can always choose to evolve. We can always grow, right? I think that's a natural inclination of the soul, but not by changing where you are, who you are, because you believe that it's shameful, bad, not good enough, not worthy, not lovable. What, you get the point. So the invitation is be patient. Be patient. Give yourself the space, the time, the breathing room to just drop into feeling. Allow your state of being to be what it is. Once you allow and soften, then it will naturally evolve. And this is what we have to do again and again and again and again. As I said in the beginning, welcome to being human. Sometimes I think, God, Corinne, this podcast gets really boring. You're just repeating the same old shit all the time. But you know what? Like, if I look back at my journey of, more than 20 years of doing this, whatever this is, just building self-awareness, it's a everyday thing. And that doesn't have to be arduous. It doesn't have to be seen as work. It's like, oh, this is just what being human is. And it becomes second nature. It becomes more natural. And it's just, it's the same thing of if you're in a relationship, it's going to take work every day. If you have children, it's going to take work every day. You have a vegetable garden, it's going to take work every day. You have a yoga practice, it's going to take work every day. I'd like a different word than work. You have to engage with it. You have to put effort into it. You have to put your love and your being into it. It's engagement, right? You can't just sit on the sofa with the remote and expect your life to happen for you. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't work that way. But give yourself the room. Be patient. Trust. Soften into. Surrender. Allow the process to do what it needs to do. You can't force the flower to grow. Make sure that the environment is good and then let it grow. We're no different. So be the flower. I'll leave it at that for today. As always, take it or leave it as feels right for you, and loving you from afar. you've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.